a lot of presentations, and we are delighted that we had such a high number of brilliant presentations. The disadvantage of that is that it's not possible, it's impossible to attend all the presentations, to follow all the discussions that are going around. And that is the idea of this morning section. We want to bring together all the chairs, the 6 chairs that we have from the 6 sections, and they are going to present, they're going to report the most pressing discussions they had, the most important findings they had in the sections. So the idea is to have a kind of cross-sectional debate, a kind of cross-sectional discussion afterwards together with you. So you're all invited to ask questions and to take part in the discussion afterwards.
Yeah, and after this report of the chairs, we will have roundtable discussions with a number of very interesting and distinguished guests to finalize the conference. And when that's done, we will have a final reception. So stay tuned, stay here, and we now simply give the floor to the chairs of the sections. And I promise to start with Matthias Grun.
Thank you very much for giving me the first slot, even though I was chairing the last, or not last, the section number 6. I'm a little bit the odd one out here, and generally the conference. I'm not an academic, I come from the Council of Europe. I have a fancy title, pretentious even, Director for Democracy. I'm mentioning that not just because I actually like it, but because it reflects the paradigm of what we do in the Council of Europe on democracy, in addition to protecting institutions, legislation, courts, political system. It's relatively recent. It's basically looking at the democracy also through democratic environment, so the conditions that need to be there in order for democratic institutions to function. And the way the areas of intervention into that are education, youth, media, culture and heritage, and civil society. I'm mentioning this because I want to thank the University of Luxembourg and the Luxembourg presidency of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe for organizing this, for inviting us to this conference, which really brings together, connects all the dots of what we are doing in this important area. So that would be my first but very important part. Luxembourg has been, since it started its presidency a couple of months back in November, really aligning itself and its priorities with that overwhelming priority of the Council of Europe, trying to find ways and support member states in countering what has been described as democratic backsliding. And working with universities, working on the basis of research, knowledge, data is a part of that exercise, essential part. So that's why I'm so pleased to be here. My only regret, I was only able to listen to one of the sections, and I'm just looking forward to listening what happened in the others, because they were all absolutely directly relevant. On mine, I have 2 disclaimers almost. The first one, of course, is that mine being 6th is somehow composed of individually brilliant contributions, but that perhaps at the first sight look a little bit less connected to each other. It's like, you know, a sale in a fancy furniture shop. They take all the pieces first, and then what you're left with are the brilliant design pieces, but they don't seem to fit together. But they do, actually. The other one, as I said, I'm the only odd one out. I'm not an academic, so what you're going to get is a report that's going to be necessarily appear like a dumped down by a bureaucrat, but and I apologize in advance for that. What we had in our, finally one less, because the first speaker unfortunately could not show up. We're really looking at very different, seemingly very different issues coming from very different angles. We looked at the web literacy, which, you know, seemingly narrow, but I think something that was opening up very broad perspectives and implications, where again we have education was important, regulation was stressed as important, and the point that much of our recent, or even not just recent, intellectual property, cultural property is being controlled, possibly owned by somebody else, which I guess it's like intellectual equivalent of buying all your gas from the Russian Federation or something. We've had the education for democracy, from communitarian participation to public discourse, which was an interesting, down-to-earth, practical and theoretical presentation of the importance of learning about democracy, which we do in informal education, but also informal one. This was about Boy Scouts, and informal education extremely important, and also in this particular case combines the two things, which is not just learning about democracy, but experiencing democracy in real life, which is important in formal settings, but it's also important but less frequent in informal settings. But this was one of them. We've had the crisis of liberal democracies by Dr. Harry Lehmann from the University of Luxembourg, which I think was a really interesting philosophical zoom out on some of the aspects and problems of the crisis of liberal democracy, and in this journey, in his words, from idea immediately after the Second World War to an ideal in '89 and fall of the Berlin Wall to an ideology today. And I think there were some really, really very interesting takes, some surprising, perhaps controversial takes, and some takes I did not understand. Remember my disclaimer from earlier. The digital diplomacy in wartime, narrative framing of sexual violence in war in Ukraine. I think that that was, of course, a very harrowing subject of sexual violence in the war context. But I think was interesting because it showed how digital diplomacy, the use of digital technology, can actually be a part of a solution, of an effort of bringing an end, creating pressures in order to organize, orchestrate, and forge an international response, legal, political, and so on. What role do artificial intelligence and disinformation play in Be Secure? First of all, compliments to what the Be Secure is doing in Luxembourg to protect and support young people in the digital environment with the threats. What I think what's remarkable is also that how they combine this with research, with evidence, and that I think is extremely important, especially because we are dealing with the environment which is changing very fast. And finally, about democracy in Denmark, the gap by Professor Gitte Bangstad, the gap which she has described, I find it interesting, about very high for Europe or the world level of confidence of young people in democratic institutions in general, but lack of democratic self-confidence in themselves about the participation. A very interesting, surprising point, I think, that can help us to understand some of the other difficult situations. I will not say much more, but I just want to say why I think that seemingly fragmented approach was interesting. There were two things that came, or more, nevertheless through, and that is the importance of education in order to be able to navigate and manage that digital environment. Education, learning about democracy, learning about digital, understanding technology, but also acquiring skills and competencies, critical thinking, attitudes that are necessary for democracy, and experiencing all that, not just learning about it. The second, combined with the need for regulation, we won't just be able to get through only by empowering, educating. We need regulation in certain areas. The other thing that came through, again, of course, that digital is everywhere. Digital is transforming, artificial intelligence is transforming. Everybody ends their interventions by saying, but of course what we want to do is to take the best in terms of benefits, but protect against the threats, which is all good. It's become a mantra. But what I'm noticing is that we are much better at identifying threats and dangers than identifying in which ways the technology, artificial intelligence, can help us to advance democracy. I think they exist, but I think we should focus more in developing those solutions and also increasing the public awareness and perception about it. Because if technology is seen majority as a threat, that actually adds to the problem, to uncertainty, fear, sense of loss of agency of people, which is again something that populism will be very agile to exploit in order to further undermine democracies. I could talk for much longer, but I will not. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Thank you. So perhaps the section that was chaired by Pedro Cardoso-Leite that was entitled Gaming versus Explaining the Future of Political Education. Pedro, do you think your section could deliver some of the solutions that could help to threaten, to...
Well, so my plan today was not really to just summarize the presentations that were made, but maybe to try to stimulate a bit discussions. And I think like that there seem to be certain consensus that everybody seems to agree with. One is that there is a threat to democracy. I think that people kind of agree to that. That this threat is real, that the risks can be quite important. And the second point is that AI and technology play an important role in that. That it's not the only factor, but it's an important factor. And there, like we heard about algorithms that are kind of distorting our perceptions of reality. We heard also that there are these civic attacks, where people try to manipulate elections. And there's also the fact that information spreads quite fast, faster than true information. And if you add a system with ads on top of that, you basically have a financial incentive to produce misinformation. And so there are, one problem is related to democracy, but it's actually quite widespread. You also have now fake science videos, right, that you can generate very fast with AI. And you have things like, videos that tell children that the pyramids have been created by aliens and they are in fact batteries. And it's produced with high quality to the point that people actually believe that this might be true. And the same is true for how to treat certain conditions, like drinking bleach to cure COVID, those sort of things. And those sort of mechanisms, they are financially, there's a lot of financial incentives to drive those sort of mechanisms. So there is a big threat. There is this huge machine that is kind of growing exponentially and that has political and financial forces to drive that, growth. And so I think those are kind of consensual points that I think everybody agrees with. Then there are questions about, okay, so if that's the problem, what can we do about it? And the points that have been mentioned are basically three categories. They're not mutually exclusive, but I think they're kind of three important topics. One is regulation, and there are of course difficulties with regulations. The second one is education, so maybe we have to teach children, teachers, etc. And the third one is technologies. Maybe we can create new AIs, new things that will kind of circumvent some of those problems. And so I will focus on the education part, which I think is kind of more tied to my particular topic. And here I think it's not clear what we actually need for education. So there's a lot of things that have been kind of listed. So we have things that are related to knowledge, what are the institutions, how do they work, and those things tend to be actually quite complicated. If you talk about, for example, should we increase taxes? So of course nobody wants just to increase taxes, but if you understand that there are relationships between taxes and what they are used for, and the relationship between that and the whole system, then your reasoning about that is going to be a bit more subtle than if you just decide about one proposition. So there is a lot of knowledge that needs to be trained. There are things that are related to skills. So we heard about critical thinking, we heard about digital literacy, and other media literacy and debating. Like there's a whole collection of skills that people are supposed to learn. And we also learned about values, right? That people have to kind of want to engage for democracy, that they want to do some actions. And in psychology, this would be related to intrinsic rewards. And so there's a lot of stuff that needs to be learned, and we don't really know like what actually we need. We don't know what matters. Like, is it more important to do critical thinking than it is to do digital literacy? Like there's a whole range of things where we just don't know. Right? So there's a lot of need for research to just understand like what's the situation and what can we do. And so even though we kind of don't know exactly what we should teach, what we can still do is we can think about like what would a good solution look like. Okay, so we don't know what the solution is, but we can maybe figure out what are some of the properties that a good solution might have. And here I think I can say several things where I think most people that educate or that are involved in learning would agree with. So first I would say active things, active interventions are better than passive interventions. If you have, in particular, if you want to learn a skill, it's very difficult to learn how to swim without actually swimming, right? You can read books about swimming, but if you don't swim, you will not swim. So the same, I think, is for critical thinking. You can read about it, but if you don't engage in the activity, you will not be able to learn that. So active is actually quite important. A second point is that it has to be personalized, and here there are different ways that it can be personalized. One is it has to mean something to you personally, and I think like one of the examples that we had about the game that was designed here in Luxembourg, the Chronicles, Migrant Chronicles 1892. I think that's one example where they use this, where there is a story that actually relates to the history of Luxembourgish people. But it's also, you also need to personalize for the abilities that people have. So if your literacy level is low, and there is a lot of text, maybe you will not be able to use that, right? So there is a lot of, like, personalization obviously is something that is better than not personalization. There are also things about, that you need to include mechanisms to sustain engagement over long periods of time. So if you have, a complicated topic, you will not be able to just, spend 8 hours a day just from morning to evening just doing that without any breaks, right? So usually, probably you have to kind of dose a bit, maybe have some variety, maybe have some novelty, so that you kind of keep engaged in a task that takes a long time to acquire. So if you want to learn a complex topic, it will take you a lot of time, and so for you to be able to engage in such topics, there needs to be some certain mechanisms to allow you to do that. I think most people would also agree with that. And finally, probably you also need to have some room for exploration and for self-discovery, right? So, for example, if you wonder what does it imply to be a dictator, right? And if you could kind of experiment being a dictator in a safe space, like that is kind of not real life, probably you could learn something from that. So those are things I think that most, I would say, educators would agree with. Then there are certain things that I think are more related to logistics that I think also many people would agree with. One is, like, if this is supposed to be an intervention that every person in Luxembourg or in Europe or in the world is supposed to have access to, probably you want it to be scalable, right? So if you have just one group of very motivated people that provide the training, you will not be able to have that group train all Luxembourgish people or all European people. A second point is that you probably want this to be quickly updatable. If there is a new topic that needs to be included in the training program, you want that to be quite fast. And also you want the content to be open and transparent so that people can decide whether or not, like, there might be biases or things like that. And finally, so I think these 3 points are kind of, I would say, suggesting that, like, using digital technologies might be a solution to achieve those things. At least that's one of the properties that make them interesting. And the last one is that probably you want to collect data that allow you to have continuous improvement and also to assess the impact of those interventions. So I think those are kind of fairly, I would say, common and for me, I would say, not very controversial points. And so when I read that description, so for me this looks like a lot like the national research priority that we have in Luxembourg, that is about creating innovative, interactive learning environments. This is sometimes also kind of referred to, serious games, and in fact, this is kind of a subpart of video games. So this is, all the properties that are listed, that I think are, very commonsensical. They kind of justify, I think, the fact that video games might actually be a good solution. And so the topic that I was the chair of was about gaming versus other traditional media. And so the question, is gaming better than traditional media? The answer is, of course, yes, absolutely. It's necessarily better because other media are a subset of video games. You can have full books inside of the game, right? So obviously, games are a superclass, so therefore, logically, it has to be better. But there's also empirical evidence that shows that games are better than other media, and that games are valuable and that they can be used for training. Of course, if you have a poorly designed game, the game will not be effective. But it's not because it's a game; it's because the way it has been designed. And you can argue the same thing with books. Like, books can also be bad if they are poorly written. And so the presentations that we had in the session, they presented several games, several initiatives that kind of are in that spirit of using games to try to teach people about democracy-related topics, and there were certain, I would say, intentions that are kind of specific to games. In particular, for the Migrant Chronicles, there was this idea that you wanted people to experience what it was like to be in that condition, what it was like to make certain kinds of choices, what sort of difficulties you would encounter. There was also this idea that because it's kind of close to you, it's close to Luxembourg, it's a scenery that you know, they're eating the same food as you, that you will feel connected, but at the same time, because they are making choices that are very different from your current life, you would also feel that it's different. Okay, thank you. So we learned, so that was, I think, very interesting. There was also Fundación Ciber Voluntarios from Spain, which I think is a very interesting initiative that I think maybe is something that we should look into and maybe also emulate here in Luxembourg. But of course, we also saw that, that digital technologies are not the solution to everything. There is a digital divide, and using technology for learning could also make things worse. And I learned also about the youth mock elections in the UK, which is a very interesting initiative. And I see that Dr. Helen is actually there. And so if you want to ask her questions, you could do that. And so overall, like maybe just to as a last comment, I think that if you look at into the future, right, and we kind of hear back the comments that we heard on the first day, that asking the top-notch specialists in AI, where will we be in 5 years? And they say we have absolutely no idea. We can do the same thing with specialists in education, right? And in particular, there is a part of this that has to be national, and it has to, because the democratic systems are kind of different across countries, so there are problems that are specific to Luxembourg. So we could ask, specialists in Luxembourg, where will research be in 5 years? And there the answer is pretty easy. It will be pretty much where we are now, because the AI has an exponential growth, but research has a pretty linear growth, right? And so the problem that we are facing, I think, is that we are not really prepared for that, right? The algorithms that we're using for research, the way that research works, I think is not adequate for dealing with that, right? And we have to figure out a new algorithm, a new ways of working that, can put us in a position that in 5 years, when AI happens to be whatever it is, that we actually have some resources, some capacities to respond to then, and not at that point start thinking about, okay, let's maybe now start thinking about writing a grant that will be funded in 2 years, and so we'll stop with this. And sorry for being interrupted.
Thank you very much, Pedro. I would contradict. I'm sure that we won't be in the field of education, we won't be here at the same place in 5 years, but that is what something that we can discuss afterwards together with the audience. I would now like to hand over to Andrea Binsfeld, Professor for History. And Andrea, you chaired the section that was entitled Memory versus History, Imagined Identity and Ethical Claims. What did you discuss in your section?
Yeah, so in our section, maybe I try to summarize a bit what were the main topics. So the conflict and crisis was, of course, in the center of most of our presentations. That means the conflict in Ukraine, of course. Also the crisis, the economic crisis in Greece was a topic. Then we had also of course, crisis of democracy was a topic, and also the blending of different crises and conflicts. So the blending of present and past. So the blending of conflicts, actual conflicts, for example, with World War II. And this in a perspective of history and, of course, also of memory. And I try to summarize the problems we saw, the recommendations. So some of the papers, some of the speakers had some recommendations, and perhaps also the debates we can have. So first, the problems. What we could state was that, or what most of the speakers stated, that we have a loss of trust in traditional information channels. The second was that we have highly personalized narratives. that we see a radical transformation of the perception of the past. So what I said, we have this blending of past and present. We have also, that was a topic, the influence of nostalgia and of myths, of national myths in the narratives. And that has influence on the narratives, on history, on memory. So we have this very personalized narratives. And we see a manipulation also of historical memory, the transformation of historical consciousness. And one speaker put it very clearly that she said that that memory overtakes history. So we have here really a problem that we have a very strong memory culture, and we have the problem how this influences history, or how historians react to this tendency. Another point is a change in socio-political attitudes. So the topic was, or the subject were Islamophobia, homophobia, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and the impact of inequalities in social background on this perception, on these attitudes. Another point was a fragmentation of identities. We saw it in videos posted by youth in the internet. And this combined with a fragmentation of the social and the disintegration of the political world. And of course, I think there was a point in all the section, the problem of disinformation and misinformation, how we can react to this. And then we had also some recommendations, so not only problems, but also recommendations. And there was one point that we should provide more moderation, so not only reactions and posting, but also some moderations in the reaction. What is an important point is the teaching of source criticism. That is a key point, or was a key point in our section, the digital literacy we have to react on, we have to care for with youth, young people, with our students. Another recommendation was that we should strengthen the diversity of EU narratives and democracy narratives. So this diversity is an important point. We saw also that it's not possible to go back to traditional news or media consumption. So that's we have to react on these new forms, how young people get their information, and that they have this they're not very confident with the traditional media. So there is this kind of reluctance. I can agree with our rector who was talking about contextualization. That was also a point in our section, that we have, of course, contextualize. We have to contextualize the use of the media. We have to contextualize the different groups we are investigating. So this is also a kind of source criticism, of course, and as a protection factor in many of the discussions, that is, of course, education. That's very important, this point. Yeah, and when I try to summarize which debates we could face now and in the future, then it's first the power of digital narratives in shaping identity and political participation as a first point. The second, the ethical dilemmas of misinformation, propaganda, and contested memories. The third, the tension between historical truth and personal commemoration. Difficult point. And last point, the role of education policy and digital literacy in strengthening democratic participation. So that, I hope, is more or less what we discussed and what could be the debates we should lead. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. The section that is entitled Fragmentation versus Participation, and you already mentioned, Andrea, the problem of fragmentation. We dedicated a special section to that theme, the public sphere in the digital age, and this section was chaired by Robin Samuel, who can't be with us today, but Hannes Keckmeister will represent him. So Hannes, what are the main topics that were discussed in your section?
Thank you very much. So maybe before starting, as you said, Robin Samuel was chairing this section, and I also had the opportunity to discuss the different presentations with him. So what I will present now also incorporates his perspectives on our section yesterday. I would suggest, as we only had 4 presentations in our section, to quickly go through those presentations just to highlight the main topics that were tackled, because I think that this gives a quite interesting overview over the topics, to then quickly come to the main results and also to the points of discussions related to fragmentation and political participation. So we started the morning with a presentation on opinion formation in the post-digital society. The authors presented the initial first findings and trends of the Luxembourgish Youth Report 2025, which is being prepared at the Center for Childhood and Youth Research here at the university since 2010, every 5 years, and which now in the current edition also includes the perspective on youth and digitality. So this presentation opened up several perspectives, such as access and information sources, but also factors that influence the formation of opinion in the digital era. We then went on to a second presentation where we changed, I would say, completely the perspectives and also the research field, as we dived into the theatrical public sphere in the Niger Delta of Nigeria, which is a region particularly struck by far-reaching environmental challenges. With the help of video sequences, we learned how creative workshops, how arts practices have the capacity to amplify young people's voices. The third presentation adopted a legal perspective and shed light on the EU's regulatory approach to online gender disinformation. We discussed the context of generative AI, deepfakes, a tense geopolitical climate, reduced commitments by online platforms in combating disinformation. And we looked into the case of young European female politicians and learned how instruments of EU law could help combat gender disinformation. And then in the fourth presentation, which was then also the last presentation, we kind of closed the brackets as we came back to the case of Luxembourg. On the basis of a mixed methods approach, the authors explored the influence of digital platforms on political participation. So this approach combined perspectives and results, first results from a quantitative study, the Luxembourg Youth Survey, and from a qualitative study which has been conducted in the framework of the National Youth Report, drawing on interviews with young people 12-29 and on digital diaries. So these were the different presentations, and I would now come to the main results and the points of discussion. And as we discussed a bit earlier on, topic also that has been raised already by my colleagues, something that concerns us all is this, are the challenges that come with this quick technological change for us researchers when it comes to approaches, objects of study, theories, but also for young people, for the families, for the schools. Challenges also for the regulatory framework on a national but also on a European level. And we could observe that we lag behind, also that law lags behind, which was particularly clear in the presentation of Dr. Valentina Golunova, who pointed out the existing gaps in the EU regulatory framework, for instance, the lack of explicit acknowledgements, weak remedies when it comes to protecting women, also and especially young women in the case of gender-based violence. So this raised several discussion points and questions, for instance, the one regarding the responsibility. Who is responsible? What is the responsibility of the users? What is the responsibility of the political decision makers? But what is also the responsibility, or should be the responsibility, of those companies that actually run digital platforms? And in fine, how can especially young people be better protected? And beyond the challenges and risks that digital media without a doubt also pose, we also turned the coin and looked at how digital platforms have amplified the voices of young people. And we could see in our panel that the creation of a network society, worldwide interconnections, the possibility to engage with people around the globe, to follow political events. We had the example of the US election campaign, opens up new forms of empowerment, new forms of agency. We had concrete example of those youths who come from abroad, who come to Luxembourg for their studies, and who via digital media have the possibility to stay connected and informed about what is going on in their home countries, real time or time shifted. With regard to fragmentation, we discussed the roles of algorithms and echo chambers. And what I find particularly interesting from a social science perspective is the potentially new fragmentations that occur within the society between youth and adults. So in this qualitative study that was conducted in the framework of the National Youth Report, we could observe that while digital platforms dominate news consumption nowadays, traditional media have overall lost significance for youths. It is not necessarily the case for their parents. So we can indeed see that in many cases youths indicate that for their parents traditional media, especially television, remain key for when it comes to news consumption, which then in turn has an impact, of course, on media and digital media socialization, but also on shifting realities. Fragmentation also between youths. So in the same study, we could observe the emergence of youth cultures, of differentiations, especially with regard to Facebook and Snapchat. So I wrote down a quotation that was presented during one of those presentations, young man, 21 years old, who answered to the question, do you use Snapchat? He said, no, not Snapchat. It's a bit too young for me. So what is very interesting here is that the use of certain tools, the use of apps depends a lot on the peer groups, on what friends have, what is used, what works, what is in fashion. And that might not be of a surprise, but it implies new forms of fragmentation around certain apps that might include the ones while excluding others.
Okay, thank you, Hannes. Seems that you had a lot of interesting discussions, and you also offered or spent some hope. We only have to figure out how we can use the media, how we can get people to use it, to fight, to be empowered. Mm-hmm. Dominic, you attended the section Truth versus Trust, Effective Politics after the End of Argument. This section was chaired by Annalena Högenauer. She has a PhD defense today and can't be with us, but we are glad that you will represent her. As we have only 10 minutes left, perhaps Stefan and you can share those last 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I prepared something written for exactly 10 minutes, but I think I will join the freestyle movement. Okay. But yeah, let's start. I will start with trust. We saw in the presentations from Raphael and Stephanie, and also from Mark, that young people trust mostly in what we called in our discussions old media, and that was interesting because we just talked about it in the press talk, that young people tend to join to get their information through radio or TV. So it was interesting to see that it wasn't the internet, it wasn't exactly or directly TikTok, but there were some traditions of how media is perceived. And Mark pointed out, for example, that the group that he had in mind, that he focused, 13-year-olds, that they depend on the attitudes of their parents, for example, towards politics. So trust and everything centered around trust and media, that's really something more traditional. On the other hand, what we saw in the other talks about more truth-making, post-truth movements, that was something different. Because, for example, Alexander Mellin, you pointed out that we live now in fragmented reality, and you called it, we had hierarchical, and now it's heterarchical. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with the fact that it's not just one reality or fragmented reality via media, but that there are different realities, and as we have seen in the talk by Andrew Mackey, also something like we have religious truth. We have different forms of truth that trickle down into politics, intertwined with power. How can we face this? And so what we had in our talks were development of several key points, key notes, that we said, okay, if we want to tackle misinformation, if we want to deal with post-truth in media, digital media, old media, then I think we can pin it down to two key points. One key point would be we have to face there are different truths, and we can't just have something in mind like a skill set or like competences or educative standards that say, okay, we can teach you how you fact check, or we can teach you how you can face different realities. That's more than that. It's important, of course. Fact-checking initiatives, workshops, these skill sets are important, but on the other hand, we need something else. We need something new. And there were 2 points. One point is we have to stop just to react to misinformation, or to react to someone in the digital sphere who empowers themselves and claims their truth. We also, from our perspectives, if we want to deal with deliberative democracies in digital spaces, we also have to claim the power back. And that's possible, for example, if we say we will establish something like a digital agora, something like rhetorical ethics. And rhetorical ethics is more than a skill set in rhetoric. Every one of us can, at some point, have a workshop about different tools for speaking, for preparing a speech, for rhetoric. But rhetorical ethics is more than an attitude towards ourselves and towards others. And so what we highlighted, it was the second point, is we have to claim this back, this power, and it might be possible in the digital sphere, but also going back into facing each other and then provide some skill sets, something like what Birgit told us about, something like safe spaces to brave spaces, to educate people, to educate ourselves, our pupils, our students, to face the challenges of misinformation and, of course, to initiate our own narratives and to make them transparent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominic. So, Stefan, you can be relieved. I just learned that the roundtable discussion only begins at 11:30, so take your time. You, Stefan.
So no, I'm a lawyer. Yeah, it's about fair trial. Fair trial requires fair conditions for everyone. So if you don't mind, you can still prolong. So thank you very much. So Thank you for your generosity, Isabel. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm grateful to the organizers for this very nice event and for this indeed insightful framework of our diverse sections. I like particularly this dialectic aspect, opposing different aspects together. It's like in my section, Parliamentary Democracy versus activism. Let me make 3 points in order to try to be in time. The first point will be, what is at stake? So stake with A, so don't get hungry. Second, what is new? And third, what is next? What is at stake? If you look already at the title of our section, what is at stake is our parliamentary democracy. I think there's really no time after the Second World War where we are facing a greater threat to liberal democracies than we do today. And there are certainly a lot of insightful discussions how we have come into the situation. There are unfortunately less insightful analysis how we might get out of this bloody traumatic situation. What I learned yesterday from all my nice young panelists that we were discussing together is that we should more listen to youth, to young researchers, to find our way out of current crisis of the democracy and to path a way forward, which might safeguard our way of life also in the future. What is at stake if we talk about parliamentary democracy? Democracy, the parliament as such, is for me particularly as a lawyer, the safeguard for our freedom. It's where our democracy derives from. It's the source of lawmaking. It's where the control of the executive power arises. It is where the sovereign speaks. The sovereign, the people, we the people, are organized in the parliament that takes a decision on behalf of us. It's the representatives we vote where we express our, say, core right of citizenship in a democracy. And all this is not just like since Habermas, but we know that accompanied and framed by an image of what the public sphere is that is fueling parliamentary debate, where are interconnections between civil society and political decision-making. So talking about this, what is at stake and the constitutional framework for Parliament, one of our presenters yesterday said, well, these institutions are getting really old. And I looked in the mirror because I felt also a little bit old at that time, and I thought, well, it's okay, still okay, it's fine. But what are and you can add also all types of activism as well. Like we did in former times, 6 to 8 generations, ecological movements, nicely demonstrating outside, or like blocking streets, harassing other people. So these were old forms of activism that also shaped democracies and civil societies very much, and helped also to readapt to societal needs, and by readapting them, also safeguarding the core of democratic decision-making and our democratic rights. Now what's new? What is new? So this is the paper where the old things were. You know? This is old parliamentary decision-making. Now what's new? What is the public sphere in a digital society? How can we make sure that people can, young people particularly, feel represented again? How can we make sure that people reconnect to our institutions? How can we, and this was a formulation that was quite often used in the panel we had yesterday, how can we make sure that people, young people, feel it again? How do they become, again, actors within their destinies, sovereigns about their lives? How can they participate in meaningful processes within a society? So these were the questions that were asked by nearly all the different participants. We started at the very early morning yesterday with a more dystopic picture about what this digital public sphere means. We heard something about, I like the term very much, astroturfing. And astroturfing is about everything what we already heard. It's about how we are faced to, excuse my French, bullshitting the public sphere with fake news, with alternative facts, with lies that, if they get more widespread, they become like as if we perceive them as being the truth, and that we are not able anymore to distinguish actually what truth is, what is exactly the goal. You can't distinguish anymore between truth and lie, and it's not about to tell lies, it's about to make it impossible to distinguish between truth and lies, and hence make it impossible also to decide what is right and what is wrong. So astroturfing was about very much manipulating public discourse. We heard others saying, of course we all know that, about the power, the digital power games that are played behind how algorithms are shaping the debate in a digital public. We heard about how, of course, the big players of the platform economy are controlling these kind of debates, how they're influencing how much followers we have, how they influence also our form of digital power we have within the internet. And it seems there are no forms of control really restricting these type of power, which is at the end, and this is a dramatic thing because this economic logic behind is if you create ressentiments, the more likes you have, and the more this economy will grow. So is it true that the public sphere, which is linked with the digital society, is messed up, like again Habermas put it? Are we lost? Is this already something, is this the end of democracy? Do we face a real risk? We do, certainly. But what I learned yesterday as well, after all, the overall impressions of all the presenters were, to my maybe older view, cynical view as well, and as a criminal lawyer also very much sarcastic view, were very much optimistic and characterized by hope. So there are a lot of new tools, digital tools can enable and can empower young people to regain control over their lives. I liked a very nice formulation, how you create your own sphere, your own space, was a term of civic media literacy. So if you use your tools, your media, and you feel it, you feel how you can influence public debate, you are part of a learning process where, of course, education plays a role, but where you are at the beginning of what this process is about, that you learn how politics work and that you feel the impact. That is where people, youth gets reconnected to democratic decision-making and are attached to maybe a new way of how democracy works. So civic media literacy was one important point. Another point was the relation and the independence between how you feel it if you protest. And you protest also by using digital tools for organizing protest forums. We had two examples. One example was related to autocratic regimes like Hungary, where the protest forums of young people were regarded to be important to pull youth out on a deadly conflict between apathy and alienation. So digital tools were the instrument, were the option, how to make them participate and how to give them the hope also to overcome forms of anti-democratic movements and to make sure that democratic rights are safeguarded. Empowerment was the key word related to that. And the same was impressive to see how also youth and young people are organizing themselves in learning about how to use digital tools. We had a wonderful example on how workshops are set up, addressed to younger people that are particularly empower them and enable them for democratic participation. All of that empowerment is about the fact that was also a key finding from us, so professors, teachers, adults, if one might say, that we should not expect to do youth what we want to do them, but we should let them do what they want to do and how they feel about it. So that brings me to the last point. What's next? How do we make sure that young people, also a quote from yesterday, matter in democracy? What should we do in order to better listen to them? I steal a remark that was made by Matthias this morning in our press talk. He was saying that by respecting youth, by using digital tools in public sphere, it's not just that we give them a playground in order to feel better. It's also for us. It's for the benefit of all of us. It's something that has an impact on the way how we can perceive in the future a democracy that is worthwhile to be protected and that has a chance also to be protected in the future. So if we look at that, what is next might be that our democracies, our institutions, our old way of perceiving these institutions might need a reshape. Might be that our European democracy might need a reshape, not only what has been decided yesterday in giving us more weapons and more arms, which might be also necessary, but also a new democratic culture reshaping our way of reasoning and debate. Maybe a more direct plebiscite way of democratic decision-making. Certainly in a large democracy also on the European level in order to make us feel again that we are also the sovereigns also on the level of the EU. So looking in all that, these digital tools can very likely constitutionalize a new form of power and a new form of participation to which we should be open, with the goal at the end of the day that our democracies are safeguarded and this far beyond the famous 5 years period that has been mentioned. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, and especially thank you to all of you who also brought up positive aspects, brought up solutions. But you talked a lot about age. I want to say thank you to our youngest speaker, Efre Kaya, who was with us yesterday. He's only 16-year-old, and he had in Stefan's section, he had a brilliant presentation. You mentioned it briefly, a presentation on how workshops can be delivered to engage people to stand up, to participate in politics. And Efre Kaya, I want to thank you very much for that presentation yesterday and for being with us. So now we've heard a kind of summary about what was discussed yesterday, what topics came up, and I want to open the floor for common discussion, for cross-sectional discussion to you, the chairs, but also I invite you in the audience to ask questions, to debate with the chairs. We have microphones here, just raise your hand.
First, I want to say thank you for all the other presentations. They were very interesting and very good food for thought. There's a topic I was kind of surprised that was not really gone into in the presentations, even though Professor Braun kind of goes into it when he mentions how we shape our own digital bubble ourselves. I'm wondering about the data protection aspect of it all, considering it's really the processing of our digital information that will actually shape the bubble that our individual digital sphere takes, but also those of others. And we kind of also went into it in another presentation when you talked about the power that companies actually have over what you see online. And that also goes into my question about the data protection aspect of it all and how that really impacts actually the shape that digital society takes.
Because it's a more legal question, I feel. I'm not quite sure about the direction of your question, but well, data protection has several aspects. If I link it between the political aspect of empowerment, I think that's where data protection plays in, that if you have a feeling that you are the author of where your data are recorded, where your data are transferred to, if you have trust in digital systems that your data are sufficiently protected, this, of course, would contribute to the empowerment of the digital sphere as a democratic instrument. If it is the opposite, if one has the impression and the other way around, and I think that's unfortunately our reality, if we have the impression that our data that we contribute to the public sphere are used to fuel algorithms of the platform economy, are used in order to extract our data from us, are used afterwards for commercial reasons, are used in the worst case scenario for state and social control. This will inevitably, for those who are critically reflecting upon the public sphere, create mistrust and hence make the public sphere a sphere where we are exposed to the power games of others. So I would say robust way of protecting data is the precondition also for digital democracy. Otherwise it wouldn't work. And despite all efforts, particularly in the EU of GDPR, of data protection legislation throughout the European Union in the last years, we see that there are still remaining problems in terms of the democratic meaning and the democratic connotation of data protection in that sense. This is then also reinforced by the use of AI that also fuels this public sphere. And of course, talking about the chances, there again, there is a risk that AI will strengthen and multiply the amount of data that is fueled, that is sent around, that is transferred everywhere, and might create a new, unprecedented challenge for data protection in that sense. Does that answer your question? But I agree that should have been a topic. Yeah. So we blame the organizers for not doing that.
Yes, just do that. Yeah. Thank you. We had a talk yesterday about authorship by Thomas Ernst, and perhaps do you want to?
Absolutely, but perhaps not about literary authorship. I think something was already said about literary authorship and the concept during the Enlightenment, where in a way the literary author, the genie, created a kind of a model for what now is perhaps an enlightened citizen able to vote within a democratic environment. And now we are dealing with teamwork structures, with machine writing and so on. So since the concept of authorship is changing in a huge way, perhaps our idea of what a modern or postmodern citizen could and can be is changing as well, surely. But perhaps, since it's the last day of our conference, I can use the destination of you, Light, or all of ourselves, since we are all authors, we are writers, we are academics, and perhaps you can address the question, how is our writing, how is our, let's say, author name changing within the digital environment? How is our teaching practice changing? You were, I think from the different sections, we heard something about creating a safe environment, perhaps for our students, using concepts of open humanities, writing together, creating the spaces within our own working environment that can create a model of what perhaps social media could become within 10 or 15 years. Perhaps you can address this question.
Thank you, Thomas. Who wants to answer? So I think it's Maxime Derian who would like to answer.
To answer? Oh, sorry. I was... Oh, sorry.
Okay, there was a question by Thomas Ernst. None of you? Andrea.
No one else wants.
No? Okay.
Yeah, I mean that was for me the impressive part of my panel, at least yesterday, to see indeed that both researchers, young activists participating in public participative processes, are regarding themselves as authors of their space. Of course, it's not the it's not the big thing, it's not the macro thing, but it suffices already that you have the impression that you interconnect with your environment and you feel an impact. So if authorship, that you feel an impact what you do, is something that is meaningful to the outside world, then I think we had a couple of very good examples in my section yesterday. And I think that's something also worthwhile to be, if we talk about, there's one term where I'm coming from saying we are currently confronted to a loss of sovereignty, not just on a state level, but if sovereignty means that we lose also our personal control on our life, and that because the environment and the systems around are becoming so much complicated and complex that we don't know anymore, how to influence lives in a positive way. The reaction is that we withdraw, lean back, and do basically nothing. But in that sense, I think digital tools, how young people use it, both for protest forums, but also for educational forums, also for transferring their content, their messages, is a crucial concept. In teaching as well, at least as far as law is concerned, we try now currently to embed AI in our teaching. We just had a session yesterday as well, where we confront them that AI is not a miracle. It's something, and particularly don't give your brain and your own thoughts to ChatGPT. Try also to maintain a critical form of thinking about it. I think that goes with authorship as well in that sense.
May I just add something to that? So I'm not really I've not really thought about that question before, but I think maybe when you look at software writing, maybe that can be sort of use case that may have some relevance here. I think that, for example, you can write code in groups, right? And then maybe your part is just a small part of that, but you're still kind of an author of the whole thing. Maybe you copy-paste code from some other projects. Maybe use tools that have been developed by others. And I think that people would still kind of feel ownership of a project that they contributed, maybe didn't write, but even like reviewing code that other people wrote, or just testing it, or making comments. So there might be some interesting ideas in that world to learn from.
Thank you. Dominic, you wanted to answer too.
Thank you. From our panel and the panel yesterday, the discussion, I think besides the legal implications, we had some hints on the ethical dimension. Because if you talk about authorship, we had yesterday the talk about authenticity. I think it's difficult. Authenticity, if there is any, we are acting in different roles. And then if we have a look at the digital environment, authorship could be to us more something like the anchor for responsibility. I take responsibility for my actions also in the digital realm, where I have different avatars, different personas, and where I sometimes maybe just have my sets of how to interact, how to provide information, how to fake things. That's really often the case. How I fake things, how I fake my own authenticity. And then I would say authorship is one perfect term to gain back something like, okay, we need to take this in educational processes, we need to take this serious, because our actions, they will have reactions. We shape the world, the digital world, we shape realities, the fragmented realities of this, of digital spaces, and so authorship to me would have this ethical dimension that we have to bear in mind.
Thank you. So Maxime Derian.
Thank you. Just I want to use the opportunity to share information about yesterday afternoon we made a kickoff for setting up an initiative which had been started at the AI Action Summit, which is called a Beneficial AI for Children, a coalition. This coalition is it's a platform we want to bridge big tech companies such as Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, the one who has got power to build AI, together with Ministry of Education of different countries as Luxembourg, France, Uruguay, many, and also association. So now the receipt started, and now we start to find solution to articulate this. And the main idea is in education, and both education and entertainment. It's to help the big tech company to be able to assess what they want to do together with scientists, from neuroscientists, psychologists, and association. So I hope it will thrive, but just I want to share this news, and the name is Beneficial AI for Children Coalition.
Thank you. We'll have a look at it. Do we have further questions? Yes.
Yeah, I've already been given the mic, so I'll jump in. We've been talking a lot about the tech side of all of this, but I think one of the taglines is democracy as well. So I'd like to bring it back to the idea of democracy and youth. I think we're in many different ways looking for an explanation for this loss of trust that we see coming from young people towards democracy. I think in Luxembourg we've seen this recently with the poll index, where around a third of the young people no longer think that democracy is the best form of government for them. So I'd like to talk about that for a short moment, or ask you a question on that for a moment, because maybe we are not necessarily looking in the wrong direction, but partly in the wrong direction, because young people are feeling like democracy has failed them in some way. And if we are looking at the world, what's going on, I personally can understand why. I mean, just looking at Wealth Cap, housing crisis in Luxembourg, we have a shooting war in Europe, climate crisis, which has been a topic for 30 years at least, has not been tackled at all. We have brilliant example in the US. This morning, the US President Trump dismantled the Department of Education. For God's sake, in the UK, the life expectancy is dropping for the first time since, I think, the Industrial Revolution. So if we are asking us why young people are turning away from democracy, maybe we'll have to take this painful step of some political introspection and ask us, maybe it is because democracy has, to some degree, failed them.
May I? A short answer to your comment and question would be yes. I think it did fail in many aspects, at least I think from a perspective of young people, and not just young people today. We heard already the opening session, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe was talking about how young people today are experiencing democracy and putting it into a context of the reality in which they live. I think that should not come as a surprise. If you are Generation Z, was born in 2000, a few years later, as it was said, you went through the financial crisis, the debt crisis, the migration crisis, the war in Crimea, COVID, full-blown war in Ukraine, and environmental crisis. So the prospects for future are bleak at the best. The grounds for confidence in future are weak. So when you ask people in a situation like this, where confidence and trust in future, let's leave democracy a little bit aside, are shaken to that point, and then you ask them, well, now we have elections, who do you want to vote for? Of course, that many of them are going to vote on the basis of a revolt, expressing that frustration and growing anger. This is, I think, what is happening, not just with young people. I think that has to be said. We see this across our society. Some demographic affected more, some social strata affected more than others, but we see that everywhere. The fact with the young people is, of course, that it seems that everything bad that happens, they get the double serving. And they, by the laws of nature, will have to live the consequences longer than ours, not to be too cynical about it. So I think that's the reality. And I think that it shows that, you know, democracy, liberal democracy, the one that doesn't just involve elections, but represents also a space in which individual rights and freedoms are protected through a system of laws and constitution, and requires material conditions that give people the basis for confidence in democracy. They have to be convinced that democracy works for them. And that is very often translated in very simple terms. Access to education, access to health, basically everything that forms your belief or lack of belief in future. And when you have a situation, and we now have the first post-war situation in Europe, which cannot claim, or is almost certain, that their life is not going to be as good as their parents. It used to be the other way around. I think that's, at the end of it, is at the bottom with this. When you put that into a digital artificial intelligence environment, you put everything on steroids, everything accelerates, everything starts to exponentially grow, the tensions grow, but I think that's also what we said. We need to find a way in order to, in that digital AI environment, also to find how technology can help us to find a solution. So, and we're not very good at that yet. I'll just say this first. I don't think we should generalize. There is a lot of, many young people who have good reasons to lack confidence in the future. There's a lot of young people that are engaged, they're concerned, and they're supportive, they're critical, and I think that's very important. That's one of the axes of Council of Europe work, bringing young people into decision-making, into public affairs as a way of making our public decision-making better. You know, we also see young people in countries like Serbia right now, which are not going around and giving, being indifferent to the world around. And I think that these young people are not lost to democracy. I think they're partners in making that democracy better, but we have to start to think why they're turning their back, why they lost confidence in democracy, and then starting to find answers, convincing answers to bring them back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias. So I have two more questions on the list. I want to postpone them, so we will switch seats, continue with the roundtable discussion, and afterwards I would be glad if you ask your questions then. So I want to thank all the chairs and their representatives. Thank you very much for being with us.
So I would like to invite the participants of the roundtable discussions to join me here on the floor. Okay, let me briefly introduce you to our participants in the roundtable discussion. Starting at my very left, we have here Alexandra Sommersan. She's currently studying psychology at the University of Luxembourg and has been actively engaged in youth participation for several years. She is currently the Secretary General of the Luxembourg Youth Parliament and a member of the student delegation here at the University of Luxembourg too. And Alexandra has significant experience in international discussions and educational matters, including her involvement in the European Youth Parliament and her previous role at the Conférence Nationale des Élèves du Luxembourg. Glad you are here, Alexandra. Then we have on her left side, changing seats now, Dr. Isabel Baumann. She is a research scientist for digital education and research at the Luxembourg Center for Educational Testing, and she leads the development of digitally supported teaching scenarios for Luxembourg secondary schools and is also a recognized expert in AI education, focusing on the integration of AI tools in teaching and learning processes. And then we have Robert Harmsen. Robert Harmsen is the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Education and Social Sciences here at the University of Luxembourg, and he is the UNESCO Chair in Human Rights. He's a political scientist, and his research focuses on European public policy, Europeanization, of course, on human rights. Thank you for joining us, Robert. And we have Marc Schöntgen. Marc Schöntgen is the Director of the Center for Political Education in Luxembourg, Zentrum für politische Bildung. He is committed to enhancing political education, promoting civic engagement, particularly among youth, and his work encourages active participation in public discourse and understanding of democratic processes. Thank you that you're with us, Marc, today. And we have, of course, another representative from the youth, which is Danny Semedo. Semedo, is it correct? He is one of Luxembourg's 3 European youth delegates. He has served as president of the Conférence Nationale des Élèves du Luxembourg for the past 3 years, and today he represents the National Youth Council of Luxembourg. And I'm very happy that you're with us, Danny, and to share your insights on the conference theme. Well, these are our roundtable participants. Good that you are here, and I would like to start with Alexandra. Well, you heard a lot about youth and democracy and participation and what is running good, what's running bad. What's your personal opinion when it comes to, you're very engaged in democracy, in youth democracy and participation. What's your impression when we're talking about digitalization and using these tools to enhance democratic processes?
Thank you. So personally, I think that digital spaces are very efficient for various institutions. Like, for example, at the Youth Parliament, we are currently working on we have an Instagram account to reach as many young people as possible, because whether we want or not, I mean, it's the fact that young people spend hours and hours every day on social media, so that's why we try to reach out to them via social media like Instagram and TikTok. We are currently working on doing appealing videos like those viral trends and so on to reach them. And we also have, because we write resolutions that are later we are presenting them to the national parliament, and those resolutions are always posted online, I mean on our internet website, so it's open for everyone and you can always access them. It's not something that is just happening between us and the parliament. So personally I think that digital tools are very important and useful for us. And also maybe something even more personal, with a friend I started an account a few years ago because we wanted to help and educate young people more about politics, involvement and so on, because it was back in 2023 when we had the communal elections, the national elections, and then later even the European elections. And we had an Instagram account where we try to reach young people and educate them on topics like how is our parliament structured, how does everything work, so that they can use this information to make their best choice for the elections later in that year.
And what's your opinion, Danny, on that? I mean, you're representing Luxembourg now at the European level. I mean, Luxembourg is kind of, by definition, a very European society. Can you share the insights from Alexandra about that? Is this also a positive experience you have?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you, Alexandra, also for your comments. But as you said, I'm one of the 3 European youth delegates, and the whole theme of our cycle actually is how we connect young people with the European Union in general. And I think that social media, and I was in Poland in a European Youth Conference 2 weeks ago, where we also discussed the important role of social media in the whole process of trust and democracy. And I can also agree with Alexandra that it is very useful to, yes, maybe rebuild this trust between young people and democratic institutions like the European Union, but also the national government, etc. But yes, I think it's really important that we can use those several tools in order to inform young people about the very many opportunities they have to engage themselves, to stand up for their rights, for democracy in general. But it is also a tool to reach all young people. As Alexandra said, the social media in general is a whole platform where we can reach all young people, especially those who maybe are not represented or participate in those organized, structured. There we often talk about the marginalized youth. We want to reach, because they also have a right to stand up for their rights, for their freedom, for democracy, etc. And I think it's important to use these very digital platforms to inform and sensibilize young people, but also, as I said, to restore the trust between the democratic institutions and young people, maybe by presenting, by explaining how an institution in a whole functions, and also their impact. It is very crucial, and it is one of the problematics we emphasized 2 weeks ago in Poland, is that young people lack trust in those democratic institutions because they do not see the real impacts, the tangible results of their participation, of their proposals. So there is the necessity to rebuild this trust and to show young people that their voice are not only heard but also considered, and also that their proposals, that their policy proposals are implemented.
So you both emphasized the opportunities, right, in the digital world, so to say, in the social networks. As well as Stefan has outlined in his reporting from his panel, young people have to make it to their tools to really becoming active and engaged. So I assume both of you are really kind of have a high level of digital literacy. You also see the threats, right? I mean, is there anything is there a kind of a habit you communicate with your peers, like, well, you know, we have these specific logic here, we have recommendation algorithms. Now, these platforms are not doing it for free, and there's a certain logic behind that. I mean, you are certainly aware of this, but how is this communicated within your groups?
Okay. Yes, I think yeah, it's really complex because I personally use a lot of social media platforms in order to communicate and to share my opinions and my experiences, and I also see it as a possibility to involve those young people that maybe are not present, as I said, in those organized structures like the National Youth Parliament, for example, so that they can also see and maybe experience those experiences with me in the social media bubble. But as you highlighted before, I also see many threats and disadvantages like misinformation and disinformation, and I think this is a real crucial challenge we should tackle, and I see it also as an obstacle to many political discussions, yes.
Mark, you are kind of cornered with two brilliant examples of the success of the Zentrum für politische Bildung. One could say like this. There are also, I think, other young people you may not reach. I mean, what are your strategies in the Zentrum für politische Bildung to enhance democracy among youth?
Yes, you mentioned the main problem, how to get in contact with all the young people and kids and adults here in Luxembourg. We are a very small institution, so it's perhaps an idea for the future to use social media platforms or other possibilities of the digital world to reach more people than we do normally. But let me give perhaps another idea into the discussion, something we experienced the last years. So we have been created only in 2016, so we're a very young institution in Luxembourg. Something we experience is the importance of direct contact with people from the political world. So it's the contrary of what we discussed, or you discussed here the last few days. So the digital world, the digital room is there, but we see that young people in direct contact with politicians, representatives, or people from the political worlds that are shaping this democracy is very, very important to get into a dialogue. Because very often social media are only in one direction, or you are there in a filter bubble, so we try to bring to explosion all these bubbles that exist in the digital world, and it's very important to have formats where we bring kids into the parliament. So we have a big event once a year when kids from primary schools go into the parliament to discuss with the politicians and to get into this dialogue about their questions and their topics that are important to the young people, to kids and younger people. So that is something that's very undigital, if you permit me to say so. And we have workshop offers in the parliament, what is on a regular basis, where small groups can come with their teachers and learn about the function and the importance of democracy when meeting people from the parliament, so representatives, even not only on the national level or also on the European level. So the contact with representatives at the European Parliament is something that is very fruitful, but it's the number of young people and adults we can reach with these workshops and events at the Parliament.
We heard yesterday interesting insights from BCQ also, let's say, call it a kind of partner institution from Zentrum für politische Bildung, doing a lot of social media advertising for digital literacy. There's this famous thing, what is called in App, can't really remember. It was about this monkey, right, that is responding and sharing without thinking things on the social media. It was very interesting talk yesterday. I mean, BCQ seems to have these very straightforward initiatives to going into the social media. Zentrum für politische Bildung is also present, but has a little bit more modest approach. As you said, you are also focusing on personal contacts. What's your strategy here in the future? Do you plan to be, let's say, also more using on the digital side, working on the digital side?
So we are developing or try to develop formats that are in the digital room. So we use the social media, for example, to make citizenship education. So not only speaking about social media and all this impact on democracy and society, but really to use these tools. So we are discussing about how to use, or should we use TikTok for citizenship education or not? So the discussion is not really at an end, because for citizenship education, not only here in Luxembourg, it's a really new field. And we don't know how to deal with all these digital developments we have, and we are looking on a European level with our partners in Germany, for example, in France, how to develop offers that not only promote digital literacy. That's something very important, and our friends from BCQ do that, and is very good and complementary to our work. But our topic is always what makes social media, what are making these tools with democracy. So it's another focus, and it's quite difficult to have formats or offers that fit for all, because discussing with students at university is quite a big difference to talking about the things with kids that are in the age of 8 or 10, because they grew up in this digital time. So born 10 years ago or 12 years ago, they are have another literacy in the digital world than people of 25 or 50, 55. So we are really at the beginning of shaping formats and workshops for kids, for young people, and for adults as well. Yeah. And the multiplier, so all the teachers that work with kids and young students in the schools, to make them fit for this digital era that where we are now in, and to show them the importance of this change for democracy. So that's not really in the mind of all the people working in the schools, that it is important for democracy as well.
Thank you very much. Would like to go to Robert. Robert, you are the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Education and Social Sciences. You are the Chair for Human Rights. You are a Canadian.
Is that an accusation or a comment?
It's a combination. It's a combination of three challenging, let's say, backgrounds. I mean, what's your impression? I mean, we heard something here about. It's a little bit depressing what we are witnessing currently when it comes to democracy. We have challenges in Europe. We have certainly big challenges in the US. Can you put this a little bit into perspective? I mean, do you see democracy under threat in general, or what are the challenges we are facing currently?
Yeah, I am depressed. Now, partly that's maybe just a character flaw, but partly I think it is actually a reading of the current situation. If there's a note of maybe reverse optimism, I'm much more pessimistic about the international order than I am about domestic democracy. I think particularly if we've looked at the past 2 months of the utter shambolic combination of chaos and authoritarianism in Washington, that has done permanent damage to any sort of notion of a liberal international order. I mean, in 2 months we've seen the unraveling of 80 years of Atlantic alliance. And those are things that I don't think can be easily restored. I'm somewhat less pessimistic about domestic democracy, because there I think there is much more in the way of counterbalancing powers in terms of the possibility of civil society activism, in terms of the resilience of democratic institutions that doesn't really have a counterpart internationally. Even if you look at the situation in the United States, 2 months in, Trump is certainly at least attempting to do serious damage to the constitutional order. On the other hand, I have no doubt that the United States remains a fundamentally pluralistic society and that he will be unable to change that in the next 4 years. They are simply different sorts of mechanisms. But I think in terms of looking at that sort of future of democracy, it poses a whole series of challenges for us, some of which are particularly to do with the digital sphere, and I think to do with a particular techno-commercial model. I mean, we have a techno-commercial model that in effect quite literally allows big companies to profit from polarization, and does so in a way where there are now significant asymmetries of power to the disadvantage of public authorities. And that is something that clearly will need to be corrected. I think there are significant movements in that direction in Europe. I think, however, those efforts risk becoming relatively isolated. I think the notion that would have been there even 2-3 months ago in Brussels is that Europe would be a leader. I think Europe now will have a difficult enough time defending its own autonomous sphere of regulation, let alone seeking to export that elsewhere. So I think there we have a real issue of governability. I think there's a separate issue of the quality and the character of democratic political debate, where we need to find ways to be more responsive to the specific concerns of youth, who I think feel relative kind of marginalization, blockages coming into their adult lives in terms of questions of careers and housing and opportunity and so forth. That's a question that I think is partly about these digital channels and about new ways of knowing, but I think it's also about, as Mark was saying, very traditional things. Engaging them with very traditional institutions and political parties and seeing how those traditional political institutions have to respond to these new realities. I think it's also at base a question of education for democracy, of the development of particular types of critical skills, and particularly their learning or perhaps relearning the skills that are necessary to have civil disagreements, which ultimately is what defines democratic debate, and which I think with the proliferation of filter bubbles and fragmentation and so on, we're rather losing.
When it comes to this responsiveness, I mean, Isabel, you are a lot of schools giving these courses for digital tools, artificial intelligence being used in educational processes. How do you see the potential of these tools, of these technologies to enhance democratic participation? Is this part of what you're doing there?
So there is a potential, but we don't use it yet. I see that in all the formation continue that I give in the schools. There are teachers that were really engaged, teachers that know a lot about the use of digital tools in education, but I see also the need to enhance this. So on the one hand, we have teachers that have to be educated, when you put it like that. When we speak to pupils, they often have the impression that their teachers are not aware what is going on, that they have the impression that their teachers don't know how to use tools, and that is not a good feeling for them. So either they have to go to their peers, so lucky for those who have peers like you, who are engaged, who are well informed, but not all of them have the peers, not all of them have the parents to whom they can go to. So it's the teachers who are very important. So we can tackle that, we can give workshops for the teachers, fine, but on the other hand, there is the potential of social media platforms for you, for the youth, and you are using it. But I attended, yesterday, I attended a talk by Birgit Hurmer, and I learned that there are far more people who use it only as an observer. They don't raise their word, they don't engage in social media as they could when it comes to politics, when it comes to democracy. So I think that is the real threat for us, finding out how can we get young people there to use it meaningfully and to engage via social media. So there is a potential, but we haven't figured out yet how we get people there.
Maybe we can ask our younger guests. There's this famous quote, you know, democracy has to be reborn in every generation and education is its midwife. So how did you experience your education? Was it in the school here in Luxembourg? Was there really a strong emphasis to, you know, get you to an informed and critical person? Have you witnessed an emphasis on this through all the subjects you have taken in your school career?
So I can only speak like on my behalf, like my personal experience. So I was here in Luxembourg in primary school and also in high school, and so sometimes we had Be Secure over that taught us about the threats on the internet, the misinformation, and so on. And then there's also maybe our English, like the curriculum of the English classes, like for the English course. So basically, we talk about different topics throughout the last 3 years of our high school education. We always discuss different topics, and some of the topics were also like digital tools, it was AI, and things like that. So yes, like in those classes we talked about, but aside from that, I don't really remember someone teaching us about the threats, but it was okay, I guess.
There's a discussion in Luxembourg that media education, so a new class like media education, digital literacy, should be introduced from, let's say, the very beginning of the secondary school until the end. It's not happening yet. I think we have 1 year or something like that.
We already have it. It's implemented since 2 years.
For the whole,
digital science.
Yeah, but it's only in one school class, right? Is it continuously? Okay, then it's done. Did you attend these classes?
No, since it's only going for 2 years, I was already in the higher classes, and I think it started in the lower classes, and now it's working its way up. So I didn't have that, unfortunately.
Okay, do you know something about that, Isabel? What's the main subjects of that?
So I think it was implemented 2 years or 3 years ago. They start very early. They have, I think, 7 different thematic aspects that are tackled. One very important aspect is AI, and their question, how is AI influencing our society? How is AI, what are algorithms? And they begin on a very low level, but as the classes, the grades go up, it's also like the question, the deep of the question rises. So it continues the whole school.
In that aspect, I mean the question of information, seeking for information, getting trustful information, distinguishing between disinformation and information is something that needs constant learning and experience. Maybe to Robert, we had a lot of discussions in several panels yesterday when it comes to this question, and we saw that especially young people tend in many cases to get their information only or basically from the social media. And there's an interesting thing, despite they know how these social media networks functioning, despite of that knowledge, they nevertheless prefer it as the main source of information in many cases. So there are some people are completely biased. So and that has dramatic consequences, of course, for being informed, being critical, etc., etc. Do you have any idea how this, will shape democracy processes at the moment?
I mean, it's clearly making a significant difference, and maybe I'll answer it first with reference to what had been the pre-social media model, in which democratic debate in effect was subject to comparatively heavy gatekeeping. If you think what the situation would have been in terms of the media landscape and so forth, prior to social media, you had a limited number of mainstream media sources that in various ways bounded political debate. It bounded political debate in ways that I think you can critically say reproduced certain power asymmetries, reproduced certain forms of marginalization, socioeconomic inequality and so forth, but also allowed for the insistence on a certain evidential base. The sorts of things that we see now, it kept the batshit crazy, if I can use that expression, outside of everyday political debate. And if you think about it, a lot of, for example, I'll come back to the Trump administration, a lot of what we're hearing now every day from Washington would not have had a hearing at all 50 years ago, because there was a very strong gatekeeping function within the media. We have now clearly lost that. That is to say, we now have an extraordinary fragmentation of news sources, which is liberating in the sense that it allows for a great multiplicity of voices to be heard, but is also threatening in the sense that there's no longer the same kind of intrinsic quality control on the information provided, on evidence, on the way that this actually then shapes political debate. I think this is maybe more of a question to our two youth representatives here, is when you go to social media, are you actually looking for news, or is news simply incidental to other things? That you're there for personal and other reasons, and the news just kind of comes incidentally, accidentally in the package, but not in any kind of structured way, and not as necessarily what you're particularly looking for.
Danny, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I think both, and it depends from every young person. Personally, for me, I'm not going to lie, my information source is quite mostly social media, because I like it and because I think it's very youth-friendly. I spent really not a lot of time, but yeah, some minutes per day, maybe scrolling on TikTok, maybe in order to see what are the several news. I am abonnated in some very newspaper or also other content creators that talk about several information and news going on around the world. But I think maybe both. I talked with a lot of young people who maybe are present in the social medias, and per accident, I don't know, they notice one news about the Trump administration. Maybe they, other people may be like me and have several content creators or some channels, to inform themselves by being in the social medias. And I think it's really, I also read newspapers and also look at TV in order to inform myself, but I think if we want to do it quickly, if we want to do it maybe, how should I say it, in maybe rather more simple way to inform ourselves, social media is a good tool because it's, as I said, quickly, simple, and often youth-friendly.
So it's sometimes kind of accidentally, but you also stay informed. I mean, you are now very active. You are politically engaged. What is with your peers who you are trying to get into this? Are they also kind of really looking for information, or is it like, oh, there's a follower I'm following, and what he is saying is interesting? Because we had exactly that example yesterday in a panel about the youth studies, that there was a quote from a 20-year-old girl here, 21-year-old girl here from Luxembourg. She said, you know, there is a certain person, an influencer I follow, because this person has 3 million followers, and that must be then a proof that she must be a reliable source of information because she has so many followers. I mean, this is the logic I can understand, but of course that's not true, right? But asking you here, do you have the same experience in your peer groups that people kind of follow these influencers which has who have the most followers, and because then it must be true?
Yeah, I think this is a form of naivety that they follow maybe the one who has the most likes, the one who has most followers, and do not consider the content in itself. And I think that I experience it a lot when I talked or when I was with other young people, that often, they are on social media, and they do not intend to really look at some news, but maybe some contents. But I want also to emphasize that often they do not inform themselves on social media because they say, yeah, look, there are too many bad news, only bad news, and only, maybe also complex, difficult news that they do not understand. Maybe they don't understand the language, the sense, or the whole political situation, maybe. And I think the crucial rule is, as was said before, education has a lot of importance here, because when young people are educated and informed about maybe the political situation in Ukraine or the political situation in the US, maybe they will get more interested in getting to know what it's going there. So I think education has here an important role, and it must be improved. We talked about civical education or political education. As a president of the National People's Conference, I advocated for those things, for more digital literacy, for more political education, because personally I think that it's not enough. Having 1 year of political education in high schools is not enough to understand maybe the whole complicated world of the political, the political world.
Thank you. I'm asking Mark. I mean, you know, the Luxembourg school system has a strong emphasis on acquiring a lot of languages.
But not on citizenship education, that's true. So I agree completely with Dani. So something we have seen, or I have seen when I was a teacher 10 years ago. So school doesn't have an answer to all these questions that came now up, but I think education, school, and citizenship education may be a key to these answers and may open doors. And something I think, so many things that are today important in the digital age have been important as well before the digital age. So checking your sources, checking the facts, being critic, having a debate or create a possibility of debating political questions that existed before the digital age. But I think the school, at least in Luxembourg, never did that. So it's important to see that we have new platforms. Young people don't read any more printed books. That time is over. They don't read traditional newspapers. That is over. So it's now the social media, the room of social media, where you go for exchange with your peers, but you go also there to have information about what's in the world. So that's perhaps new, but the questions you have to make are, for me, is still the same. Being critical, checking the facts, and that's more and more important today, I think, because you have many offers, many channels of social media, not only one. And school has one big problem: it's always too late. And politics, and that is something I wanted to add to you or to Robert, talking about democracy is boring. Talking about or learning about institutions of the democracy is boring, and the institutions have the problem to open their doors to the young people. Come to us and we explain, or we are there for you and we can give answers to your questions. So that's a problem. And institutions here in Luxembourg are beginning, so at the beginning I talked about the direct contact is very important, and institutions in Luxembourg began to open their doors and to invite young people, come to us, and we are open for discussion. And the digital room is something that we have more and more, but the institutions are not on the social platforms to get in contact with young people, so that's a big problem. So the young people are always in advance to the technological development, and institutions and teachers and education are always a little bit late, so that's a structural problem.
Yeah, that is exactly mirroring what we was hearing about the situation in Denmark yesterday. It was a nice talk by Professor Stork, and she said actually that, yeah, well, there is a certain desire to trust the institutions, to get along with the institutions, but that the institutions, when it comes to the digital representation, are a little bit, yeah, boring, as you said, not state of the art. Maybe last question to this round before I open to the public, to Robert. I mean, we see in the States, as you mentioned here, an erosion of institutions or an attack on the institutions. The success or the what we see with right-wing parties, populist parties in Europe, is also kind of a situation where these parties argue against traditional institutions. How can we defend democratic institutions here in Europe, put it like this, and what, from your perspective as a political scientist, have the institutions to do to become more modern?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two questions there. I mean, the one is about the rise of various forms of populism, and there I think you have to unpack these different parties because they are not all of the same kind of character and nature. There are some that clearly, I mean, are outside of any reasonable democratic consensus. There are others that are effectively expressions of a quite traditional conservative nationalism, which you can agree with or disagree with, but is certainly within the bounds of normal, legitimate democratic debate. So I think part of this is about a kind of bounding exercise of thinking about, okay, what does and does not fall within a democratic consensus, and simply disliking or disagreeing with something does not put it outside of that consensus. So I think there has to be a far greater responsiveness to the underlying concerns expressed by these movements by not actually taking a defensive position to begin with, but rather by seeking an inclusion of the legitimate underlying concerns and allowing for a political debate that, for example, on questions like migration, allows for an open, free, and frank discussion without the exclusionary, the racist tones that we've seen with some political parties. In terms of the institutions themselves, I mean, I think it is a bit about openness, it is a bit about flexibility. At some point, I mean, an understanding of democratic institutions is an understanding of democratic institutions that in itself is not particularly exciting. I mean, I can tell you for years of having taught basic courses on the European Union, the one way to immediately kill any student's enthusiasm for the European Union is to give them a detailed explanation of how it works. And And there, I think there are ways that you can do this in terms of, rather than these very traditional presentations, thinking about issues, thinking about questions, and saying, okay, if you want to do something about this, about an environmental issue or something in your commune or in your neighborhood, how do you go about it? And then actually you take them through the institution, you take them through the processes in order to see how a kind of democratic engagement can work. But all of this is really about responsiveness, it's about dialogue, and certainly in terms of some of what we've seen as regards the rise of various political movements, it's not about curling up into a defensive ball.
Thank you very much. So let's open to the public. Are there questions to the panelists? There were some questions being postponed. Maybe this is an opportunity to ask them again. I believe that also the chairs, some of them are still present, could answer. Any comments or questions from your side? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Hi, my name is Alice. Thank you all for this roundtable discussion and also for the panel previously. My question was originally for them, but I think it would be suitable here too. And any of the chairs, maybe we can have lunch together after and discuss this too. But I wanted to take the opportunity to ask about something that I struggle with a lot myself when I'm studying young people. I think sometimes it's a bit of a double-edged sword where we want to give a lot of respect for this group particularly because I think it's a group that is often overlooked or forgotten or not properly treated. So conferences like these are so important to have. At the same time, I think we sometimes tend to have a lot of expectations on young people. Young people should be media literate, they should engage, they should do it in the right way, they should not trust this information, they should not use ChatGPT because that's lazy. And this type of dynamic, I think, is really difficult to find a good balance in between. So for this conference, I've been wondering for myself a couple of times, what if this conference was named Democracy and Boomers in the Digital Age? How would it be different, you know? So I sort of wanted to hear some of maybe your reflections on this topic. How can we make sure that we give young people the respect that they deserve in these types of discussions about democracy, while not speaking about them as this, I don't know, a vulnerable group that is uneducated and not engaged properly, and they need to solve the problems of our society? This is a bigger question for all of us, right? Thank you.
Perhaps spontaneously, I think young people have something to say. They have ideas about their future. They have their questions, and I think we should first listen to them, and not only speaking from an adult perspective or from a scientific perspective to them. So there I agree completely with you, and what we see in our daily work with young people, even with kids, they are thinking in a political manner, but it's not the way political parties or adults think they should argue or think about politics. So that's a problem of perspectives, a problem of difference of age perhaps, and how we see young people. They are very creative. And what we see also in our pedagogical work and in our workshops, they like to do things. They don't like to read, they don't like to listen to teachers or to politicians who tell them what to think or to listen to them, oh, be careful, or you are not cultivated, what you said now. And I think giving them the possibility to be creative, to reflect in their way and to speak in their manner is very important in the daily work with people and young people in citizenship education. So short reaction to what you said.
As organizers of the conference, we try to integrate also voices, not only voices, we try to integrate young people. So we are very glad that you accepted to come here. We, as I mentioned before, we had a talk by a younger person, and we had a talk that was written together by one of our colleagues with scouts from Luxembourg. But it was hard, so we also offered travel support for young people, but it was really hard to reach them. Perhaps it was also because we used the general university channels. We tried also to distribute the call for contributions via social media, via Instagram and so on. But yeah, it's hard to get them to get you here.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, I'll try to fill the void. It's a simple yes or no question. Is social media, as we see it today, in practice, not in theory, not in Disneyland, perfect social media as it should or could be, but social media as we see it today with its financial incentives being controlled by a few very powerful people all over the world, is this model of social media, which I think is a misnomer, it's not classical media, it's a topic for another day, but is this social media as we see it today fundamentally compatible with maintaining our social democracy as we have it today?
I have one comment on that, and then I pass it to the colleagues on the roundtable. I mean, it is very clear, and that research has shown that the nature of social media with these algorithm structure and recommendation logic and all these things, that this is something that clearly supports populist narratives, no? Because of their emotional dimension and their way of, you know, getting into spiral of attention, no? and that there's a lot of research going on about that. That's clear, and it's always very difficult to counter these populist rhetoric, these arguments, because then it becomes again boring and complicated, and that is not, you know, rewarded by the logic of this algorithm. So to some extent you are right. I mean, it's a problem by its structure. No? It's a structural problem for democratic discussions and engagement. But then I maybe to Robert.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say at this point is that the prevailing commercial model, the economic model, because we always talk about the technology, it's not the technology, it's about the economic organization of the technology in a particular way. And I would say the prevailing economic model at this stage is clearly a threat to democracy, yes. I would not have said that as clearly 10 years ago, but I think we've now seen the progressive sort of reinforcement, institutionalization of a particular model that is antithetical to having relatively balanced and open democratic debate. And I think it's quite interesting for those of us of a certain age of having lived through this evolution, because I can certainly remember back in the halcyon days of the 1990s when we first had access to the internet and so on, we saw it as a uniformly liberating thing. That I don't think anybody at that stage even thought about drawing a balance sheet. We just thought this is wonderful in terms of the access to information, in terms of the way that this actually potentially gives voice and so on. And clearly the way that we've seen that organized in terms of a particular type of commercial logic, it is very much more now threat than opportunity. And that's something where we need to have an effective political response that, to the extent possible, reaffirms a kind of model of governance. That said, I mean, beyond simply the asymmetries of power between the tech companies and public authorities, I think we also have to be cognizant of the nature of this space, and irrespective of the commercial model, how intrinsically fragmenting it is. And even if you think about it, just in terms of giving a sense of this, think about something like Facebook. Facebook has 2 billion daily users, has 3 billion monthly users on average. On average, they post apparently 1.75 times a day. In terms of a massive information, if you want to do the math, that means there are slightly under 1.4 trillion Facebook posts a year. There are limits to governability as well.
Okay, I suggest that we continue our discussion via lunch, which is, I think, already prepared. I would like to thank you first, the panelists on the roundtable, and for your time, your willingness. I would like to thank all participants who had a long morning again, but now we succeeded. It was a fascinating conference. I'm very thankful for all of you that you all were here. And I think if you look in the social media, there's a lot of posting already ongoing. I think people liked it. Thanks for your contribution. We will inform you, in fact, about the possibilities of a publication. There will be definitely one. We are in the final stage of discussing with our with some editors, but it looks very good. We will inform you about that and hope that you can send back your papers very soon. Then, thank you again to everybody. And now let's have a nice break and a reception. See you there.